It started on a quiet Saturday morning. Marcus James, a retired Navy SEAL and single father, was sipping his coffee inside his modest home when a thunderous pounding shook his front door. Before he could even set the mug down, three uniformed HOA cops, not real police, but the overzealous private enforcers hired by the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, were screaming at him. "You're in violation. Open this door immediately," one bellowed, fist smashing against the wood like he was raiding a cartel hideout. Marcus frowned, calm but alert. "Violation of what?" he muttered to himself, standing tall in his sweatpants and black t-shirt. He hadn't done anything, his lawn was trimmed, his house spotless, his dues paid. Still, these so-called enforcers barked threats, warning that they would force entry. When Marcus didn't immediately comply, the pounding escalated until the entire door rattled on its hinges. Then, with one final smash, they burst inside. The three men stormed his living room, yelling accusations about unauthorized modifications and suspicious gatherings, as if he were running some kind of criminal operation. One shoved a clipboard in his face. "We don't tolerate violators in our community. Pack your things. This property will be seized." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just any homeowner. He was a decorated SEAL veteran, a man who'd fought in covert missions across the world and faced warlords, terrorists, and pirates. And now, he was being threatened in his own home over an imaginary rule written by power-drunk neighbors. But instead of snapping back, Marcus kept his voice even. "You boys just made a mistake," he said quietly, locking eyes with each of them. "A big one." They laughed, mistaking his calm for weakness. "What are you going to do about it? Call the cops? We are the law here." Marcus smiled faintly. "No, you're not." When they finally left, after tearing down one of his security cameras and leaving a violation notice tacked to his broken door, Marcus sat back down at his table. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Alpha Team," a voice answered. "Brothers," Marcus said, his tone ice cold. "We've got a situation." Within hours, black SUVs rolled quietly into the neighborhood at night. Former SEALs, men who had fought alongside Marcus in the deadliest places on earth, stepped out, silent and disciplined. They weren't here for violence. They were here for justice. What the HOA didn't know was that they hadn't just harassed a veteran. They had just declared war on a SEAL team. The HOA board sat smugly inside their headquarters, a glass-walled office that overlooked the manicured lawns of the community. They were laughing about how these rules keep people in line. What they didn't realize was that David, the man whose door they had smashed in, wasn't just any homeowner. He was a retired Navy SEAL, decorated for missions so classified they weren't even spoken of. And tonight, he wasn't alone. David's team, 6 former SEAL brothers who had served with him in some of the world's deadliest hotspots, arrived quietly, one by one. They moved with precision, blending into shadows, their boots silent on the pavement. These were men who just talked about discipline. They embodied it. The HOA president, a man named Richard with a too-tight suit and a love for power, looked up when he heard the sound of the front door unlocking. He frowned. "We locked that, didn't we?" he muttered. The door swung open. David walked in first, his presence commanding. His team flanked him, towering, stone-faced men with the kind of calm that comes from surviving chaos. The board members froze. Their smirks evaporated instantly. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard barked, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice cracked. David dropped a folder on the conference table. It slid open, revealing photos, printed emails, and bank records. "This," David said evenly, "is evidence of every illegal fee you've collected, every intimidation tactic you've ordered, every family you've harassed." The board members exchanged nervous glances. David's second in command, a massive man named Cole, stepped forward. "You thought you were dealing with scared homeowners," he said, his voice low. "But you kicked down the wrong door." Another SEAL, Jackson, leaned over the table and whispered, "You don't mess with one of ours." Richard tried to bluster. "Why you can't intimidate us? We're the governing body here. We make the rules." David's eyes narrowed. "You don't make rules. You abuse them. You forgot something. Rules only work when people consent to follow them. You lost that consent the moment you started acting like tyrants." Suddenly, Another SEAL produced a small recorder. He pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Richard's voice from earlier board meetings. We'll fine him until he breaks. If he resists, we'll get security to rough him up. People like him don't belong here unless they learn their place. The blood drained from Richard's face. You've been extorting families, David continued, his voice growing sharper. You've used your security as thugs. You destroyed property. You crossed into criminal territory. He pointed to the evidence on the table. This is already with my attorney. And with the DA's office. Cole leaned forward, his hands planted firmly on the table. We're not here to hurt you. But understand this. If you ever step out of line again, if you harass another family in this community, we will be back. The room was dead silent. The HOA members stared at the SEALs, men whose calmness was more terrifying than any threat. David finally stood straight and collected the folder. You work for us, not the other way around. Remember that. The SEAL team turned and filed out, not rushing, not needing to. The weight of their presence lingered like a storm cloud. Outside, neighbors had gathered, watching. They erupted into quiet cheers as David and his team stepped into the streetlight. For the first time in years, the residents felt safe. From that night on, the HOA was silent. No more bogus fines. No more harassment. Because they had learned a lesson the hard way. You don't smash down the door of a Navy SEAL. The man, David Carter, sat calmly on his couch as the HOA enforcers, self-proclaimed community cops, stood outside his shattered door, still puffed up with the arrogance of small-time authority. They barked about grass length, paint colors, and unsanctioned modifications, pretending that these petty violations justified breaking into a veteran's home. But David didn't flinch. He picked up his phone and made a single call. His voice was steady, almost cold. Yeah, it's me. Activate Red Echo. Location, my house. You'll understand when you see it. The HOA thugs laughed. What? You calling your lawyer? You're finished here, Carter once sneered. David didn't even look at them. No, I called my family. Minutes later, the quiet neighborhood was interrupted by the low rumble of vehicles rolling in. Matte black SUVs with tinted windows. The doors opened, and men and women in civilian clothes stepped out with the kind of precision you could only learn in years of combat. These weren't ordinary visitors. They were David's former Navy SEAL teammates. The HOA bullies froze as the team fanned out. No weapons were drawn, but their presence was overwhelming. The way they moved, the intensity in their eyes, anyone with sense knew these people could dismantle you in seconds. Which one of you thought it was a good idea to smash my brother's door? One SEAL asked, his voice sharp but calm. The HOA leader stammered, We're enforcing community rules. He violated. Another SEAL cut him off. You violated federal law. This is breaking and entering. Intimidation. Destruction of property. And you did it to a decorated veteran. Big mistake. David stood now, tall and commanding but not shouting. Gentlemen, you thought you were untouchable because you hide behind a clipboard and a cheap badge. But you just declared war on the wrong man. The HOA leader tried to laugh it off. You think you scare me? You're just a bunch of has-beens. In a flash, one of the SEALs stepped forward and disarmed the man of his little baton before he even realized it, snapping it in half with 2 fingers. Still think we're has-beens. The HOA goons backed up, their swagger crumbling into fear. Neighbors started gathering outside, recording everything. Whispers spread like wildfire. The HOA messed with the wrong guy. David raised a hand to his team, signaling restraint. He wasn't about to let things spiral into violence. We don't need to hurt them. We'll destroy them the right way. The SEALs nodded, already pulling out files, photographs, and evidence. They had done their homework fast. Within hours, they had traced the HOA's finances, exposing embezzlement, illegal fines, and extortion schemes. This, one SEAL said, holding up a folder, is enough to bury your entire operation. Federal crimes. RICO level. And guess what? We've got contacts who love taking down corrupt little empires, like yours. The HOA leader's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. David stepped closer, his voice low but powerful. You broke my door, but you also woke me up. And now, I'm making it my mission to end your reign of terror in this neighborhood. My team doesn't lose. The crowd of neighbors erupted in cheers. For the first time, they realized they weren't powerless against the HOA's bullying. They had someone who could fight back. And this was just the beginning. The tension in the room was thicker than smoke after a flashbang. The HOA board, still red-faced from being forced into their own meeting space, looked around in stunned silence as Commander Torres stood at the head of the table, his posture commanding, his voice calm but deadly serious. "You all think power is a game," Torres began, pacing slowly, kicking in a veteran's door, threatening his family over a paint color, a mailbox, or grass length. That's not governance. That's abuse. One of the board members, a wiry man in an expensive suit, slammed his fist on the table. "You can't just storm in here like this. This is trespassing." The Navy SEAL beside Torres, broad-shouldered, calm, with the gaze of someone who had seen war, leaned forward. His voice was low, controlled, but carried the weight of a warning. "You kicked in my brother's door. That's a declaration of war in my book. And you're lucky he called us instead of handling it himself." The board shuffled uncomfortably. One woman in pearls whispered they wouldn't really, before falling silent as another SEAL locked eyes with her. Marcus, the Navy vet whose home had been attacked, finally spoke up. His voice cracked with both anger and pain. "I fought for this country. I bled for the right to come home and live in peace. And the first threat to that peace wasn't a foreign enemy, it was you." He jabbed his finger at the HOA president. "You came into my home with force. You terrorized my kids. You treated me like a criminal because I didn't follow your petty little rules. Now tell me, who's the real criminal here?" The room fell dead silent. Torres let the silence linger before slamming down a thick folder. Inside were photos, recordings, and statements from countless residents in the neighborhood. Stories of fines, harassment, and threats. Every ugly abuse of power was documented. "This," Torres growled, "is evidence. You've been extorting families, threatening single mothers, targeting veterans. We've got neighbors ready to testify. We've got recordings. We even have video of your little tactical enforcement squad breaking into Marcus's house. Do you know what that is?" The president, pale now, swallowed. "WH what?" "Federal crimes," Torres snapped. "Impersonating law enforcement, breaking and entering, harassment, intimidation. You want to play cops? Well, congratulations, you're about to find out what happens when real justice comes knocking." Another SEAL stepped forward, setting down a laptop. On the screen, live footage from body cams showed the HOA's so-called security team storming Marcus's home, yelling orders like they were running a raid. The neighbors gasped, their anger boiling over. "You terrorized us for years," a resident shouted from the back. "All because of grass length and mailboxes. This is our community, not your kingdom," another yelled. The board members looked trapped. Their power, once so absolute, was crumbling right before their eyes. Torres leaned in, lowering his voice, making every word hit harder. "You thought you could intimidate good people into submission. But you messed with the wrong man this time. Marcus isn't alone. He's got a team. He's got a brotherhood. And we don't scare easy." Then Torres straightened. "Here's how this works. You resign. All of you. Effective immediately. The HOA as it stands gone. The community takes control, democratically, the way it was supposed to be. If you don't, then we hand all this evidence over to the FBI, and you can explain to them why you were running around in tactical vests pretending to be cops." The president's lips trembled. You wouldn't." Marcus's voice cut him off like a knife. "Try me." The room exploded with applause from residents. The HOA's reign of terror was collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. But Torres wasn't finished. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. "And if any of you ever think about pulling a stunt like this again, remember this night. Remember who showed up at your headquarters. And remember that you don't get to play soldier in a world where the real soldiers are watching." The board sat frozen, their empire of fear reduced to rubble. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt a shift in the air, like the chains had finally been broken. The HOA board was still in shock after the visit from Ethan's old Navy SEAL brothers. The team hadn't hurt anyone, but they had made their point loud and clear. Every board member knew They were no longer dealing with someone they could intimidate. But the next morning, Ethan noticed something odd. A black SUV parked just down the street, tinted windows, engine running. He'd seen this before in deployments overseas, in counter-surveillance training. Somebody was watching him. His instincts kicked in. He walked casually to his garage, grabbed his drone, and sent it up. From the live feed, he zoomed in on the license plate. Government issue. Not HOA security. Not local cops. Federal. That same night, a letter slid under his door. No postage, no envelope. Just one typed line. Stop making enemies you can't fight. Ethan smirked. Whoever left it didn't realize that he'd spent half his career making enemies exactly like that. Instead of backing down, Ethan got proactive. He called his SEAL team again, not for intimidation this time, but for recon. They spread out across the neighborhood, blending in as joggers, delivery guys, and dog walkers. Within hours, they identified 2 men from the SUV rotating shifts, keeping eyes on his house. They're not HOA, said Marcus, Ethan's closest teammate. They're contractors. Private security, hired muscle. Someone on the HOA has deep pockets. That revelation changed everything. This wasn't about grass length or mailbox paint. Someone on the HOA was funneling serious money into silencing Ethan. He dug deeper. Using contacts from his military days, he pulled property records, board member financials, and contracts. What he uncovered was explosive. The HOA president was running a side deal with a private developer, trying to force homeowners into violations and fines to drive them out, so he could sell the properties in bulk for massive profit. And Ethan? He was the only one standing in the way. The SEAL team agreed on one thing. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was war. They staged a plan, gather undeniable evidence, expose the scheme publicly, and take down everyone involved. But they had to move fast, because the SUV surveillance meant their enemies were already one step ahead. The night before the operation, Ethan stood on his porch, staring at the HOA headquarters down the street. His jaw clenched, his heart steady. He'd fought in deserts, jungles, and war zones around the globe. Now the battlefield was his own neighborhood. And this time, he wasn't fighting for a mission overseas. He was fighting for his home. The HOA officers were backed into a corner they never imagined possible. The smug board members, who once flaunted their authority, sat frozen as Commander Marcus stood tall in their HQ, his voice steady, commanding, but never losing its razor-sharp edge of discipline. You broke into my home. You terrified my family. You thought your little badge gave you the power to do whatever you pleased. But here's the thing. He stepped closer, the weight of his military background hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I've defended this country against enemies who would stop at nothing to destroy it. And tonight, I defend my home from you. The HOA president, pale and trembling, tried to stammer out an excuse. We were just enforcing the rules. Marcus slammed a stack of papers on the table, evidence his team had gathered. Illegal fines, doctor violation notices, and secret bank transfers. No, you were abusing your neighbors, lining your pockets, hiding behind bureaucracy, while bullying people who didn't have the strength to fight back. Well, guess what? You picked the wrong man this time. The SEAL team stood behind him, silent but formidable, their presence amplifying the gravity of his words. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Marcus leaned in. Here's how this is going to go. Every fraudulent fine gets refunded. Every illegal action is documented and reported. And every one of you resigns, effective tonight. If you don't, my team and I will make sure federal investigators tear this place apart, piece by piece. The HOA members looked at each other. Some hung their heads in shame. Others scowled, but none dared to defy him. The president, voice breaking, muttered, We resign. The Navy SEAL team didn't cheer, didn't gloat. They simply stood firm as justice was done. Marcus gathered the papers and turned to leave. Before walking out the door, he glanced back at the broken men and women who once terrorized his community. Leadership isn't about power. It's about service. Remember that, if you ever try to sit in those seats again. When he stepped outside, his neighbors were waiting. Families who had once lived in fear of the HOA now stood in awe of the man who had defended them. Cheers erupted. Kids ran to hug him, and tears of relief flowed freely. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. Marcus raised his hand to quiet the crowd. This was never just about me. It was about all of us. If you want to keep your community safe, you stand together. Bullies can't survive when good people refuse to back down. The people nodded, some clapping, some crying, all united in a way they hadn't been before. As the Navy SEALs quietly disappeared into the night, Marcus walked home, the weight of justice delivered on his shoulders, but also the peace of knowing his family and his neighbors were safe again. He closed his front door, looked at his wife and kids, and whispered, "Mission accomplished." If you love this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community at Dark Side of Luna, where stories of courage, justice, and unexpected twists come to life every week.